It's been more than 24 hours now since a reporter and cameraman were murdered during a live TV news broadcast. We now know much more about their deranged killer, but so many questions remain. Vester Lee Flanagan was fired from WDBJ in 2013. The general manager of the statement doesn't know exactly what set him off more than 2 years later.
We are still at a loss to figure out what happened to him in those 2.5 years. But most of our time we are spending focused on the results of his actions yesterday, the loss of Adam and Alison, and our bond with the community, which has been so strong for the last 30 hours or so.
The boyfriend and father of Alison Parker are also focused on her memory and that of Adam Ward.
Andy and I have been trying to be strong today because we felt that it was our duty to Alison, because she was a journalist and this is what she would have wanted us to do, is to share her story. She was a storyteller by profession and we are trying to tell her story. We are also trying to make sure that her life was not in vain.
She excelled at everything she did and she loved what she did. She loved the people that she worked with. She was happy with her place in life. So, we can only take, some solace in the fact that she had a wonderful life. She was extremely happy, and she loved this guy with all her heart. And that's the toughest thing for me, that everybody that she touched loved her, and she loved everybody back.
The only survivor of the attack is thankfully going to be okay. A hospital spokeswoman says Vicki Gardner has been upgraded to good condition. She was being interviewed by Parker when Flanagan started firing. Here is her husband, Tim.
What do the doctors say her prognosis is from those injuries?
Likely a full recovery, but it'll take some time. I spoke with Vicki for about 3-4 minutes while she was being transported to the emergency room at Roanoke Memorial. She explained what had happened to her and that she didn't know how she survived, but she did, and that she loved me.
For more developments, Rick Leventhal joins us now from Roanoke, Virginia. Lev, we're going to go around the table with a couple of questions. Can you just give us the very latest on basically the way the community is dealing with such a tragic loss? And by the way, first time, if I'm not mistaken, something like this on live TV.
Yeah, and the general manager came out and spoke a short time ago and said that it's going to take time for them to heal. Obviously, the entire staff of WDBJ7 mourning the loss of Alison Parker and Adam Ward, who were murdered on live television doing a live shot. And Eric, we learned this afternoon that the station has suspended doing any live shots outside the perimeter of the station grounds until further notice. They're going to evaluate it on a day-to-day basis, but they're not sending any crews out to do live shots for now, because of what happened yesterday, which is a pretty dramatic development. Also, the GM confirmed that Vester Lee Flanagan had significant behavioral problems that led to his termination after less than 1 year as a reporter here, that he threatened violence, and police had to be called to the station on the day of his termination, and they escorted him out of the building. And on his way out, he handed a small wooden cross to the former news director and said, "Here, you're going to need this." They also made it mandatory that Flanagan seek counseling through the Employee Assistance Program because of his behavioral problems. He had anger issues. They said an inability to get along with others, and they said he did in fact comply with that treatment. But then he later, after his termination, filed an EEOC complaint. That was dismissed. He also filed a civil suit against the station, and that was rejected. And they say they had seen him around town, but there was never any negative interaction until he fired on that crew yesterday morning.
Juan?
Rick, what we're learning is very troubling to me. It says that he was traveling with extra licenses, with a wig. I read here that it says he had a shawl, umbrella, sunglasses. He had additional ammunition. Does it look like he had further plans?
Well, it's hard to say, but he was a couple 100 miles north of Roanoke, headed towards Washington, D.C., and as you mentioned, he had a Glock in the car. He had 6 magazines. He had extra 9mm ammo. He had some sort of disguise. You mentioned the wig and the sunglasses. And he also had a lot of typed and handwritten notes and 17 stamped envelopes, but we don't know who those letters were addressed to. But this was a guy who had already murdered 2 and wounded another, and perhaps with all that ammo and his weapon, he was intending to hurt others.
Rick, it's Kimberly. So when I look at the circumstances of this case, I see someone who obviously went through some degree of premeditation, planning to put this in motion in terms of how he was dressed at the time, being able to secure a weapon, we've heard legally. And the fact of the matter is, how did he know for sure that they would be doing that live shot at that location? I'm curious as to whether or not he had any information that someone from the station inadvertently could have provided with that specific live shot location, especially so early in the morning. It's not something that would have been an extended hit where you'd see it on TV and then go there.
Yeah, it's possible that he may have seen them on television. I'm not sure if that was her first live shot of the morning. She may have had another hit yesterday morning, and we need to confirm that. But obviously that would have been one way that he would have known that they were there. But he could have seen the live truck. He could have known somehow through a connection at the station that they were going to be there. But the fact is that he did know they were there. He went there and executed them simply, apparently, because he had a beef with the station and he wanted to lash out at WDBJ.
It seems like he was waiting, though, for a specific opportunity to go and do that because of the fact that he had all the stuff in the car, he had the extra license plates, the equipment, the stuff with him. So it wasn't just all of a sudden a crime of, opportunity, last second, acting out because he saw something that upset him.
Yeah, and he had his camera in one hand and the gun in the other, and he shot the whole thing on video, and then he posted it online. He was tweeting about the shootings afterwards and sent a 23-page manifesto. He faxed it a couple hours after the shooting to ABC News. So there was a lot going on there, and clearly this was something that had been building for a very long time, and yesterday was the day that he snapped.
Greg?
Yeah, Rick, two quick questions. Is there anything in this guy's background? Because I know he passed a background check. Had he ever been arrested? Is there anything that was there? But then you look at the job. That's the first part. What about the job history? It seems to me that he was a terrible hire. There was a string of accusations. He was known as an incompetent reporter. How did he keep getting a job?
Well, that's a very good question, Greg. And he held a number of jobs in the TV industry, which isn't rare, but he held them for very short amounts of time. And in fact, had filed lawsuits against 2 previous employers claiming racial discrimination and other charges that were never, as far as we know, upheld. They were tossed out. So this was a guy who had a series of problems with former employers in the TV industry, and yet he was able to get a job here. And in fact, the general manager said that he got very good references. The general manager also said, though, that it's very hard to get a negative reference these days, that because of the litigious society that we live in, employers are afraid to give bad reviews to people when they get calls about former employees from potential future employers. So they'll just give them a generic answer or give them whatever nice thing they can say without saying anything negative for fear of it coming back and haunting them later. So this was a guy who clearly should never have been hired here, but was apparently because former employers were too scared to say otherwise.
And Jeff Marks, the general manager at WDBJ, said that because he changed his name and used Bryce Williams, that for some reason the background check didn't go to his original investor, Lee Flanning, which is insanity, why they wouldn't be linked. But go ahead, Rick. We
all know in today's world you could find out who this guy really was and get more information on him if you looked hard enough.
Right, Dana?
I wanted to ask about the community reaction to the 2 people who lost their lives. So one thing that struck me was both of them, Adam Ward and Alison Parker, were at the point in their lives where they're doing the jobs that they loved after their college experience. That's a great job for a 24-year-old to be able to be at a local market like that. Yeah. And then there's such affection for your local news, and I'm a huge fan of local news. But both of them also were planning to be married, so they're young and in love. And I would just wonder what the community reaction has been about their lives.
Well, it's just an absolute tragedy, Dana, on all angles. I mean, Alison Parker was a young, up-and-coming reporter. Everyone said she was terrific at what she did. She brought all kinds of energy and was just a wonderful person from everything we've heard. And she was engaged to Chris Hurst, who's an anchor at this station. They had moved in together. They said it wasn't public yet, but they were planning to get married. I met Chris last night along with Alison's father, 2 outstanding individuals who are just crushed and heartbroken by what's happened here, but standing strong in the face of all this to try and get out the message of how good this person was, how awful this crime was, and the changes that they believe need to be made in order to try and prevent future crimes from happening. And then, of course, Adam Ward, who was engaged to the morning show producer, who was producing her last broadcast. She was getting ready to leave for another job. He apparently was ready to give up being a TV cameraman and do something else. So the two of them were about to celebrate. On that very morning, she's in the control room and watched her fiance get murdered.
Rick Leventhal, we're going to say thank you very much for that report. So one thing that really strikes me is, Greg, as you pointed out, he was literally tweeting the video that he took of the shooting. If you've seen this video, it's very disturbing. The shooter, Mr. Flanagan, Vester Lee Flanagan, walks up, holds the gun up, points it towards the camera, towards Alison Parker, looks over at Ward, walks away, and then steps up again and begins opening fire. And then Greg tweets the video, puts it up on Facebook and tweets the video.
Yeah, well, it just speaks to the desire for infamy that we see a lot in these spree killers. The guy scared his coworkers enough that they actually locked themselves, a sales force had locked themselves in a room. And you wonder at this point, as individuals in a large population of the United States, that we have to become psychiatric narcs because no one's catching them. But you have to remind yourself, this is incredibly rare, but it's amazing that everybody knew. Everybody works and knows something that you worry about. Is this person crazy or is this person dangerous?
And KG, you know, and so someone gets fired. You think of big corporations that let maybe 1,000 people go. Once they let them go, do they have a responsibility to follow up on it, on any of these people who they may be worried about? And maybe people you're not worried
So
about.
much is driven, right, by litigation. Then you have to balance, like, privacy interests. And if, you know, at what point then does your tether to that person and your public, you know, responsibility? If you, in fact, know that somebody is seriously mentally ill and could either harm themselves or others, I think you have an obligation as an individual to get that information to the right hands, because you see there's situations like this. This wasn't about the Glock that he had legally. This was about the mental health issue that he had demonstrated repeatedly in work conditions and workplaces, that this was someone that was hostile in terms of his reactions and interactions with other employees, that clearly was having problems and then became unemployable. But then the whole issue, like Greg, you were mentioning, with people giving the reference because they don't want this guy. Oh, the guy's a little crazy. I don't want him to get mad at me. And you make it somebody else's problem. That's not the right thing to do.
That's why nobody warned anybody.
No.
Dana, this happens more often than we know. This one happened to be on live TV, which is creating a lot of interest and a lot of focus on it. Happens hundreds of times per year, workplace violence, where one worker kills another worker. Will this elicit change?
I think, well, you know, we're going to get a chance to talk about the mental health aspect in the next block, and also on the gun violence issue. So, like, how do you, from a policy perspective, how do you deal with it? You know, Ben Dominant of The Federalist wrote a piece today about the existence of evil in the world and accepting that there is going to be evil in the world, and then how do you figure out a way that policies could actually work against that? And in some ways, it's just very humbling because there's a lot of things that we could do, but sometimes we're just not going to be able to.
You know what strikes me, though, is coming back to what you were talking about at the beginning, Eric, which is, you know, you just feel overwhelmed by the grief. You know, you watch the father and the boyfriend. Yeah. And, you know, one of the realities, this is what I'm talking about when you talked about this being shown to the nation live and to the people involved, is that the injured woman recovering in the hospital, her husband saw it live. Ms. Parker's boyfriend was back in the studio as the host, the anchorman. He saw it live. So you see your loved one killed live. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's a horror movie come to life.
We're gonna have